We're gonna start today. We are gonna start today with a little dialogue. So I'm gonna start by going over really quickly. I saw a lot in all of your narratives that you guys are starting to use dialogue quite a bit. Great, that's good. So today we're just gonna work on kind of fine tuning that dialogue and making sure that you get the most out of your story with your characters. So first, we're just going to go over really quickly like why we use dialogue. Most of you guys have a pretty good grasp on it, so I'm not going to go over it a ton. But the first reason, just pretty straight up, it advances your story. Um, Dialogue gives your story more flair. It gives your reader insights into your characters. I mean, the development of characters is one of the most important things in story. It's kind of as the story progresses with the plot, character development is something that's really important for your reader. It gives a lot of insight into your story and what you're trying to get across to your reader. It brings dynamic. It provides more realism. It makes your story feel like, or the reader makes them feel like they're a part of the story. All these are really important. It's really important to define your characters, just so that your reader isn't lost. When you read a story, like a famous story, like one of my favorite books of all time was to read about Katniss Everdeen in the Hunger Games. You follow Katniss's journey the entire time, so you start to connect with her. Chris, you need to put the crutches down. And last, it just provides information. It gives you a little morning, Charlie. Sorry. Actually, Chris, do you want to bring the what? I am for the first block. Chris, do you want to bring this down to the front office for me? That would be awesome. Charlie Taylor, you're no longer absent. I'm not absent anymore. You're not absent anymore. Thank you very much. Okay, so another reminder just on how to write dialogue, because sometimes when you're writing your narrative, you kind of get lost in writing and it's all great, but there's some rules that are important to follow. So quick reminders, make sure you always use quotation marks. I think that you guys are pretty good about doing that. Also with punctuation, the punctuation should always be within the quotation marks. Just a reminder, because sometimes that gets a little bit messy. Every time someone new speaks, you should start a new paragraph. It makes it way easier for the reader to follow back and forth dialogue when there are breaks in paragraphs, so that they can kind of follow along. That all kind of makes sense. Um, Introduce your speaker one time, unless it's really unless it's really confusing dialogue going back and forth quickly. Usually, you can introduce them one time and kind of let it run with it. The reader can often follow along, just like that. So we're actually going to go over some examples. Okay. Okay, so can someone read this bold passage right there for me? Yes, Charlie.
I was so embarrassed. I didn't know what to say. Um, just apologize, she said. I'm sorry, I said. You're forgiven. Let's go get a swim, she said.
Right. So that's totally fine dialogue, right? It looks right. The rules we just went over. Everything looks good. Right. So the only thing with dialogue like this is there's a lot more you can do, right? So when you're writing a setting, I think Nevins has talked to you guys already about as you're writing, it's really important to make sure that you are always adding setting in. You're always adding an action for your characters so that you can show the motivation. You remember the motivation sheets we wrote? Like you wrote down all your characters and then their motivations. It's really important that you can get that across as often as you can in your story because motivations constantly change in stories, in your narratives. Sometimes they remain the same, but sometimes the motivations of characters can run into each other and it creates tension. So it's really always important um, to do that to make sure that you provide a lot of detail to provide motivation for your characters. So this is an example of something that is just dialogue. It's pretty clear what they're saying back and forth, but you don't really get anything more out of it. You can't tell where they are. You can't tell what they're doing, what they're thinking, and things like that. So there are ways that you can write in your narratives with dialogue that also provide a lot of these details. So, with that one in mind, I hope you can read it. Does someone else want to read this new paragraph? So remember this one, but does someone else want to read? This is a little bit more detailed. Charlie, you want to go again? Sorry, you want to read the first two? Okay. Yeah, Charlie, you want to go for it?
I was so embarrassed. I didn't know what to say. I kicked a pile of leaves that I gathered at the base of one of the trees on Bergen Street. My face felt like it was so hot it would melt. A breeze whooshed, and leaves danced on the sidewalk. Just apologize, snipped at the length of her face. She was biting her bottom lip. I knew it was hard to ask for an apology. An acorn fell off of a tree and ricocheted off a part, off a car parked in the corner. The smell of tomato sauce and garlic wafted in the cool air to her hair. My stomach growled. I snapped another kick at her, and now I'm stomping everything on the sidewalk, moving intentionally to them and crushing them under her boots as she walked. My heart pounded. What if I apologized and she didn't forgive? What if I didn't and she never spoke to me again? I'm sorry, I said. She turned her head and smiled. You're forgiven. Let's go get ourselves, she said. She pointed to the pizza shop 2 doors down. I raced ahead, stomach still growling so I could hold the door.
Awesome, thank you. So what's different between the two things that Charlie read? What are some of the differences? Yes, what?
There are a couple interesting words.
There are some interesting words. Yeah, what do the interesting words provide for the reader? What did you say? Hardness to read. Yeah, sure, it makes it a little more difficult to read. Ella? Adds a lot more detail. Yeah. What do you know about these characters now that you didn't know from the first passage? Where they are. Yep.
In
Say October. October area. You know the months of the setting. Hannah, did you have something? No. What else?
They're on the sidewalk.
Sure. So you know literally where they are, the setting, the time, and the place. You know things. What she's thinking subconsciously. She's a little anxious about apologizing, right? You didn't know that before, so you kind of get a sense of how she's feeling about the situation. What about? What does it say? Everybody said stomach's still growling, so you know that she's hungry. You know she's motivated right there by food a little bit, right? So you get some insights kind of into the story, into the situation, way more than the dialogue that was provided before, right? So can everyone kind of think in their narratives right now where there's spots where there's dialogue that maybe you could add some more detail so that the reader knows more about the situation? Yeah. So yours is perfect. Chris, yours is perfect too. All right, I will. I will. But before we do that, I'm gonna pass this out. Yeah, yours is perfect too. I guess everyone's is perfect.
Mine sounds exactly like
Alright. I'm here. To our mystery tasting. Meeting us down there. We're gonna go and we're gonna look at a different selection of mystery books for the next unit, so everyone can pick a book. We'll get when we get down there. We'll handle that. No, not like eating food. Okay, can someone read to me the first kind of part of the passage, the first half of the paper? Any volunteers? No. All right, I'll read this one, but I'm gonna have someone read the next one. All right. So as May interrupted, she was looking at me, calling me a much cooler version of my name than I was used to. I couldn't help myself. I smiled. She had given me a cool nickname. It was almost like we were friends. My eyes left the spot on the carpet I had been staring at, and I looked at Maeve. Yeah? I said in what hoped was my coolest voice. Maeve leaned forward on the beanbag chair, her perfectly painted fingernails planted on her knees. You know Tilly better than anyone in this room. Why does she dress like that? What do we think about that passage?
Ooh.
Yeah? Yeah, Cameron? So it's possible. Yeah, you get that a little bit from that last sentence. Swear? Maybe. She didn't interrupt immediately. Yeah. Ella? Yeah, absolutely. Nervous. Feeling like just Adele. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Charlie, did you want to say something? Or you're all good? Okay, so you can see just by the way that this is written, like we get some insights that we definitely wouldn't get if it was just the dialogue back and forth, right? Like we know that she's nervous. We know that maybe she's a little bit lean. There are things we can infer because of the text that you couldn't if the details weren't written there. So now this last part, I'm not gonna have you read anyone read it out loud. But what you're gonna do, read it to yourself, and you're gonna write in some a detailed sentence or two to make this passage jump a little bit more for the reader. So then maybe you know the setting. And it's totally made up, so it can be anything. But the goal is that you want to add some setting, you want to give some motivation to your characters, something like that. We'll take 5 minutes, and then at the end, we'll share some of them out. Yes. Yes, of course you can. Everybody clear on directions? Okay, cool. Yes.
Three.
Good, just put it back. You know she will serve.
What am I doing?
You're just gonna write a sentence